Hi, everyone. Welcome to Teach 110. I'm Dr. Q. I've met most of you already on Zoom. I am going to each week record a module for each of the modules that you'll be going through for this course. The first one's probably going to be a little bit longer just because I want to touch on a few things. Some of it will be a repeat from what we talked about in our Zoom meeting, but hopefully will be a nice refresher by the time you get to completing these modules. So hopefully you all have access to the Canvas site. Right now I'm showing the Canvas site for Teach the 110097, which is the section of you that are going to Brighton, England. I will likely combine the two sections 097 and 099 just to make it a little bit simpler for me, but that shouldn't make a difference to you in terms of how you navigate the Canvas site, submit your assignments, and so on. So as you've probably had, in other courses, the toolbar for Canvas is along the side. You can access the syllabus. I haven't built the modules out yet. I'm doing this on May 14th, so I'm getting ready to do that in the next few days. So soon you will be able to access this, see everything in Canvas. I upload everything all at one time so that you can work ahead if you want to, work at your own pace, and so on. So important information about getting in touch with me, the syllabus, and so on is in Canvas. As you know, the textbook for this course is Affirming Diversity, the 7th edition. So I access this online. You can get an online version. It's a little bit cheaper than buying the paper version, but if you find it online used, sometimes you can get it cheaper. So if you have the online version, you can go in, you can access everything through the online system, going through the table of contents and so on. So you should be able to pretty easily navigate through and read everything if you decide to use the online version of the textbook. There may be times when I include other information in the Canvas site, other readings that I want you to do, but that will be clear on the course calendar, course outline when that is the case. All right, so now we're going to pop into our content for this week. So for this week, you should have read the kind of the preface to the Affirming Diversity text, as well as Chapter 5 in the textbook about cultural identity. There was also one additional reading by Jant that was in Canvas that you should have had access to. And each week, I would encourage you to do the readings before you go through the presentation, and then do both of those things before you complete the weekly discussion that's due every Sunday. And the dates for that are listed in the course calendar as well. So things for us to keep in mind as we start moving through this course. One, this is a course about cross-cultural understandings and multicultural education within public schools in the United States. So it's important to kind of keep that as a framework, especially given that this is a course that's assigned or linked with a study abroad experience. So everything that you read in the textbook is going to be centered around public education in the United States. And so you're going to be having other experiences, of course, when you're studying abroad and you're going into schools and other places, but you'll always be thinking about the readings and the context and the content for this course in the frame of public education in the United States. So, as you read in the preface for this text, there are some assumptions or things for you to keep in mind as you're moving through this course. The first is that Identity, so who we think we are, we're going to be talking about that this week. How we see ourselves and how we encourage our students to see ourselves are connected, linked with individuality, similarities and differences, as well as power and privilege. And we're really going to spend some time unpacking what that means and how that relates to how different students experience education, and also try to take it back to how you experienced education given your context, where you grew up, where you went to school, and so on. And multicultural education is inclusive of many differences. As we learned about in Chapter 5, and we're going to talk more about that in a little bit, when we talk about culture, it's more than just those dominant identities like your nationality, where you come from, your race or the color of your skin, your gender. It's inclusive of a lot of different elements. So we're going to be talking about that and how we can support our students in the future to feel good and proud about who they are, the language they speak, the place that they come from, the identities that they have for themselves and share with others. And so we'll be talking about that a lot throughout the time that we're in this course. The next one, teachers are not the villains, and that you might be like, okay, that sounds kind of strange. But over the past, I don't know, probably 10 to 15 years, and, also to some degree since COVID, the educational profession has sort of been under attack in terms of how people view education, especially public education. And so an underlying piece of this text is that we as educators are doing all that we can to welcome students into our classroom environments and spaces to help them feel comfortable and acknowledge who they are and support who they are and who they want to become. And so that's an important piece for us to keep in mind as we move through. And then finally, quality public education is a cause worth fighting for. At ISU, we train you to be educators who will likely work in public schools. That is a foundational element of our programming at Illinois State University in our College of Education and in the School of Teaching and Learning, is that we are training you to be public educators. Not all of you will go out and become public educators. Some of you may work in private schools, other industries, other educational organizations, but keeping in mind as a frame of reference as we move through this course in particular, that we're talking primarily about multicultural education within public school settings. All right. So central principles of this book. It's important for us to keep in mind that even though we as teachers exist within this context where we may not feel like we have a lot of power and control and ability to make choices, we within our own classroom spaces, generally speaking, have the opportunity to control what happens within that classroom space. You may have to submit your lesson plans or curriculum design to people within your school or your district. But what happens on a day-to-day basis and how you make students feel within your classroom is largely up to you as the teacher. So it's important to keep that in mind, that teachers do have choices. The next thing to keep in mind is that who you are as an educator and your identity is really, really important and central to effective instruction. So if you feel like you have power and agency to make choices and have some control over what happens within your classroom, you're going to feel better about the instruction that you provide to your students. That seems really like duh, but in some places, and even more so now, you've probably been learning, teachers don't always feel like they have that power and that agency. And when that is taken away, we often or generally feel less in control of what's happening with instruction within our classrooms. And then finally, kind of putting all these pieces together, and this is a quote from the text, when we realize that we as teachers have choices and we are able to articulate these choices explicitly, we take the first steps towards empowerment. All right. So we're empowering ourselves as teachers. When I say that word empowerment, I get little goosebumps because it's such an important piece that we feel empowered so that we're able to help our students feel empowered over their own education and their own ability to make important choices and decisions within their own lives. So we can define this as a collaborative creation of power. And when we talk about a collaborative creation of power, we're talking about a collaboration between us as teachers, other educators at our school and across the country and even throughout the world, as well as a collaborative creation of power between us as teachers and our students. So those are important things for us to keep in mind and are really central to themes that you'll see woven throughout this textbook. So our current context, we say all that like we have power, we have choices, but we also have to be aware of a lot of things that are happening in public education right now, everywhere, but in particular thinking about this in the context of public education in the United States. So these are some questions that we might have rolling around in the back of our minds. And especially as we go out, many of you are pretty early on in your educational experience at ISU, but as you start to see more and more, do more observations in schools, both in Spain and England, for those of you who are in those different places, but also within public education settings in the United States, we may start to ask ourselves questions like, why is it that some students succeed academically while others fail? What contributes to that? How do I contribute to that as a teacher? How do our systems contribute to that as school districts, even within state education systems? Next, what do race, ethnicity, social class, language, gender, sexual orientation, ability levels, all those differences that we will unpack and think about throughout this course, what do those have to do with learning? Some would argue they don't have anything to do with learning, but I hope you understand, and if you don't understand this now, you will 100% understand this by the end of this course, that these similarities and differences that makes us unique have everything to do with learning, how we learn, how we process information, and how we respond to educational experiences, how we as students who are becoming educators, as well as how our own students process and make sense of things, depends a lot on these differences. We'll be looking at the significance of the achievement gap. At this point, maybe some of you haven't really heard much about the achievement gap. We're going to talk a lot more about that as we move throughout the semester, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today. But basically, that achievement gap is thinking kind of back to that first question of why some students succeed and others fail. What contributes to that? Because often the things that contribute to that are the points in that question number 2. Race, ethnicity, social class, language, gender, all of those things contribute to why some students succeed academically, why some students fail, and why we end up with this gap between the students who succeed and fail, which we know as the achievement gap. The fourth question, how does societal context influence what happens in school? Boy, that is happening a lot right now. You're hearing about the parental influence, school board influence, even social and political influence within schools. And so we're going to be talking about how those different pieces can impact the lives of you as the teacher, but also of your students. On the fifth point, how can the school system's policies and practices exacerbate and or perpetuate inequality? And part of the goal of this course is to think about how we as teachers can be change agents so that we can disrupt some of those policies and practices that do perpetuate inequality. But it's important for us to understand what that looks like, and how we can be change agents to make that happen. How do you think the pandemic impacted students, inclusion, equity? We're going to look at this. This is something you won't be reading about in your textbook because you may have noticed your textbook was written in 2018. So as we do unpack all of these different elements of identity, of context within public school, policies and practices, we'll be thinking about how things have been impacted even more so as a result of the pandemic, and try to weave that into our conversations as we move through the course as well. And then finally, what is your role as the teacher? We can think and talk and discuss all of these issues and challenges and even opportunities that are available to us. But until we really understand what our role is and how we can impact and make change, it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. All right. So throughout the semester, I also want you to be thinking about these questions. The kind of teacher or person you want to be. All right. You might be like, okay, I'm maybe like a good person. Well, good. A good teacher. Yep. But what does that look like? What does that mean for you versus the other 7 or 8 people that are in this course? What does that mean for you now? What does that mean for you in the future? And so trying to kind of keep these things in mind as we move through is an important piece to reflect on. What kind of people do we hope our students, or even our own children, if we think we are going to have children someday, will grow up to be? What kinds of abilities and knowledge are accessible to children within our classrooms? How are we providing access to and opportunities for students to learn about differences and similarities within ourselves and within other people? And then ultimately, what kind of society do we want to be a part of creating for the children of the future? And yeah, you might be like, whoa, that seems pretty heady and very, very big aspirational thing to think about. But these are the kinds of things that we're going to examine as we move through this course. So I want us to be thinking about the power that we have, the power and privilege that we have as teachers, the control to some degree that we have over learning environments and learning opportunities and experiences that children have. So I always keep this quote, I am a teacher in mind. And I hope that you, as I read through this, and even as you read through this on your own, think about the power that you have. And on the right, I love this little picture. I have this up on I'm looking at it right now. It's on my piano in my dining room, and I have one in my office as well. That you think about how you can use the power that you have as a teacher for good every day. So this quote says, I've come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in the classroom. It's my personal approach that creates the climate. It's my daily mood that makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess a tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated and a child humanized or dehumanized. So you might be going, whew, wow, never really thought about that much power as a teacher. But if you think back to teachers that you've had in your educational experience, you can probably very quickly think about those teachers who made you feel small and little and that you weren't really worth a whole lot. Hopefully, you did not have many of those experiences or teachers, but sadly, probably all of us have had at least one. Mine was my fifth grade teacher, Mrs. Greenwald, who told me I shouldn't even try to do math because I would never be good at math. I remember where I was standing, when she told me that, how it made me feel, and to this day, I struggle with math. And I know that the power that a teacher has is so important. So we want to be thinking about those teachers who inspired us. And we want to be those teachers who inspire our children, who are instruments of inspiration, who make learning joyful and create welcoming spaces for our students. And so I hope that you can keep that in mind as we move through this course, but not just as we move through this course, as you move into your career as a teacher. How can you continue to be that person who is an instrument of inspiration for children? All right, so now we're going to move into chapter 5. All right, so in chapter 5, we really take a look at our own culture, our identities. I like to start with this chapter instead of moving through chapters 1, 2, 3, 4 before, because I think it's important for us to think about who we are. For many of us in this class, I'm assuming, I'm just, and this is me making assumptions, which we'll learn about the dangers of that. But I think for many of us, we are probably Caucasian, female. I think we're all female in this course. Probably from middle income type families settings, maybe two-parent households. And so we may have a culture that we don't really recognize that much because it's sort of an invisible culture. If I asked you, tell me about your culture, some of us might have a really hard time verbalizing what that means to you because that's not something that you've really had to spend a lot of time examining or thinking about because you are a part of what we call the dominant culture. And we're going to talk more about what that means. And you read about that in chapter 5. If you are a part of a non-dominant culture, you're probably very aware of culture and can clearly articulate things that are relevant to you in terms of your cultural identity, where your family comes from, languages that are spoken, color of your skin, if you have gender issues or not gender issues, gender differences. If those are a part of the non-dominant culture, you're probably very aware of that. All right. So when we think about defining culture, there's a lot of different parts and pieces that go into how we define our culture. And so we're going to watch this about 4 minutes of this video clip. I put the clip here as well so that you can access this on your own. I'm hoping that the sound quality is okay. And there will probably be an ad because I forgot to open this up ahead of time. Oh, there's not. That's exciting. Oh, of course, there's always ads. Sorry about that, guys. But I mean, there's a teacher in the video. That's exciting. Oh boy. Okay. So hopefully, as you were watching that video, you were thinking about who you are and sort of the sum of your own parts. You know, what makes up who you are in terms of your culture, and what do you think people see when they look at you? And do you think it's a fair assessment of you, right? Um, a lot of times, as the person on the videos pointed out, people what they see or what they think about are the more dominant culture types of things related to your race, your gender, your nationality, things that are easily defined, that many people can identify with, and that are the same for a lot of people typically within the given population. But what really makes us unique and different often are our subcultures. And so, in the reading that you had for this week, the article that was in Canvas by Jant, um, you read about subcultures, which are really like mini cultures within dominant cultures, right? So, we may say as our nationality that we're American, but what does that really mean? Right? Because each one of us have probably had different experiences. Some of us grew up in the state of Illinois. Some of us grew up in a small town in the state of Illinois. Some of us grew up in cities within the state of Illinois, right? So being from an urban area versus a rural area, those are like subcultures, right? Um, some people may have differences in terms of subcultures related to experiences that they've had. So, a subculture that all of us share is that we're part of a college community. All of you are college students. I'm an alumni of places. You're an alumni of your high school. I'm a dog lover. You may be a cat lover. You may be a Taylor Swift fan. I'm not so much, but I enjoy other types of music. So when we think about culture, dominant culture and subcultures, there's really an infinite number of different cultures that are out there. And if you can imagine, that's true for us as individuals. That's also true for each of our students. And part of what we need to do as teachers is help them understand what their cultures are, who they are, to appreciate who they are, and to advocate for themselves to be able to share those cultures with others. And so as we move through this course, we're going to be thinking a lot about our own pieces of the puzzle. You know, if we think about, when people look at you, what do they see? Do you like the assumptions that people might make based on what they just see about you? Do you agree with the assumptions that people probably make when they look at you and make a first impression? What are some of those things that they don't see, that maybe some of those subcultures that you really want people to know more about you? And how can you share those with other people and with your students? And how can you encourage them to do the same as well? So when we think about cultural identity, it's a little bit different than just culture in general, right? So cultural identity is really when we start to identify how we are a part of a group, what groups we're a part of, what does that mean to be a part of that group? What are some of the norms within that group that define who you are if you are a part of that cultural group? And so in chapter 5, we learned that culture is not static, right? It's not something that you are born a certain culture and that's what you remain the rest of your life, right? You may be born with a certain racial makeup based on your genetics or genetic makeup, and that kind of is who you are for the rest of your life. But everything else is kind of up for chance. You may be born into a family that speaks only English or speaks only Spanish, but as you grow and learn and progress, you may decide, I want to learn other languages and become bilingual or multilingual. You may be born a female, and as you grow and learn and just change over time, may decide, you know what, I'm not sure if I want to identify only as a female, right? So some of these things can change and shift, and many things like the type of music that we like, the sports that we play or enjoy, organizations that we're a part of, sororities, fraternities, all those kinds of things. Those things are constantly shifting and evolving, right? And so what's interesting and what makes life interesting is how we can connect with other people who have similar cultures, but also different cultures, which is what you all are really going to be experiencing a lot in your study abroad time that you have in England and in Spain. So in the text, we learn in chapter 5, we learn about the hybridity. I have a hard time saying that word. And how we can think about the fusion of cultures. And these are things that really excite me. And this is part of what you are going to really be experiencing in your study abroad your time abroad, is how people from different backgrounds can come together and find things that are similar and really learn more about themselves, even from people who are very similar, who are very different, right? And so we you are going to grow and change and learn so much in the time that you are abroad that will be so beneficial for you as you come back and finish your education degree at ISU that you can take with you into your classrooms in the future. So, when we think about influences on culture and learning, it's important for us to think about learning being at the core of our discussion about culture, right? We want to constantly be learning about others and truly learning about ourselves, and thinking about how our experiences have influenced who we are today and how we are continually growing and shifting and changing and evolving into even better versions of ourselves that will really help us to understand other people's cultures who are different from ours, and how we can help our students understand their place within their own cultural identity and how they can move and shift and evolve over time as well. We want to think about the fact and this assumption that culture is the primary determinant of academic achievement. Having that assumption is, as it says, oversimplistic. It's really dangerous and counterproductive, because although culture may influence our experiences, it may influence our educational opportunities, it does not determine who we are. And that's much of what we're going to be examining, unpacking, and thinking about throughout this course. And so finally, when we think about learning styles and preferences, it's important for us to understand that each of us learns differently. The same is going to be true for our students. And we want to be thinking and learning about how culture influences how we learn, how we process information, and how we can use that information to improve our own teaching. There's still a lot for us as a field in education to learn about learning styles and how culture influences how each one of us learns. And so the more that we understand, the more we'll be able to help our students be successful within our classroom. We know that there's a lot of research that's happening, that's continually, and even since this textbook was written, like I said, we've lived through an entire pandemic that literally changed the world and changed the way that we teach. And so we have to continually be thinking about how the world is evolving and what that means for us as teachers, what that means for children as students and learners, and how we can continually process and use the information that we're learning through research and experience to become better teachers, to connect better with our students, and think about how we can individualize and differentiate our approaches to teaching to align with our students' approaches to learning. All right. And so as we do this, we will always be thinking about the fact that not all people learn the same way. We know that. We learn differently. I'll try to use a variety of different learning methods and strategies in this course. It's a little hard when we're meeting online and we can't do as much individualization, but hopefully I can demonstrate and model some of these things that then you can use and model for your students in the future. You've probably all learned about Gardner's multiple intelligences and how we all learn in different ways and how we can use that in our efforts to individualize for our students. And then thinking about communication styles, we want to always be thinking about words and words as power and how we can think about our teaching within the context of what we're doing, with what we're learning, with how we are presenting that information and sharing it with others. And part of what we're going to be talking about as we move into next week, and I know you have so many readings for next week, and I apologize that, but is how we can think about our individual differences, our culture, our identity within our culture, and what that means within the socio and political context of schooling in the United States and within the country that you're visiting, either in Spain and England. And hopefully, what we take away from that is that there's no single solution to this issue of the achievement gap, of the cultural divide. But what we do know is that there are things that we as teachers can do to support our students to understand themselves better, for us to understand ourselves better, and to move that conversation forward for all of us as teachers and as learners. All right. So I know that was a lot. I will try to keep each of our presentations to 45 minutes, hopefully more, a half an hour in the future to an hour. As you all know, every week you have a journal discussion that is done in Canvas. You are required to respond to the prompt and at least one of your classmates. I love it when it's more of a true discussion and there's more of a back and forth, not just one response, but your requirement is to do at least one response. As I said, I know next week is a very heavy week for reading, and so hopefully you have an opportunity to work ahead a little bit as we read chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the textbook, which really gets us into thinking about the context of schooling, public education within the United States, what multicultural education looks like and how that has evolved over time, and hopefully getting you started thinking about what this might mean for you as a teacher in the future here, as well as your experiences that you'll have abroad. All right. It was a great opportunity to share with you. I look forward to continuing to share with you. If you ever have questions, concerns, anything at all, please email me and reach out to me, and I will try to get back with you as soon as possible. Have a great day, everyone.